Hey guys, Chris from Pro Obese Audio Installation, and today we're doing a sub and amp install in this 2020 Volkswagen Passat. In this install, we're going to show you how to tap into the factory system, run all the cables, and mount your amplifier and sub in the trunk. Let's get started. Alright, so here at the bench, we have this kind of old school power acoustic amplifier that the customer wants us to install. He's also specifically asked we mount this to the back of the rear seat. We have power and ground, part of an amplifier wiring kit. We're using OFC wiring here. We also have some budget-friendly RCAs, a remote turn-on wire as well, and then we'll need some speaker wire from the output of our amplifier that'll go to the subwoofer. Finally, because we are tapping into the factory system, a couple of methods that you can do to install a line-out converter, or a way to pull that signal to feed our aftermarket amplifier so it knows what to play. Now here's a budget-friendly line-out converter. These Volkswagens are known for kind of a bass roll-off. Generally, Volkswagen does that to protect the speakers at higher volumes so the bass doesn't distort and destroy the factory cheap speakers. Now, there are line-out converters out there like an LC2i by Audio Control that help bring back in that bass roll-off. But if you don't want to spend the money on an LC2i, customer wants me to go ahead and put in a Scosche line-out converter. At least this Scosche, what it does, it also provides an amplifier turn-on circuit here, which is super nice, just because these Volkswagens are known to run on a CAN bus system. So what this guy will do in our line-out converter is this will provide our remote turn-on. Whenever this senses audio over the inputs, it's going to put a 12-volt output so our amplifier can turn on. So these are the bits and pieces that we're using. The subwoofer is a P3 mounted in a Rockford Fosgate box. But essentially here we have all our components. The first thing we need to do is get power through our cable, run from the battery out underneath the hood all the way to the trunk area. Let's get started. Here we are underneath the hood. Our battery obviously is right here on the driver's side. Now there's not really a good stud to mount your power wire to. We can still use this, but generally there's a crease here in the stud itself that prevents the nut from falling off. We can force drive that nut off. You can cut this nut off and replace it. Totally up to you. But essentially here, this is where we're going to actually connect our power wire. We'll run it along the factory loom. And then we're probably going to pass through the firewall back behind the battery box. Generally, there's a grommet there that we can use to run our power wire. So let's go up underneath the steering column to drop down the panel so we have the access to run our power wire. Okay, so we're here underneath the steering column, but we have T20 Torx on both sides here that we need to go ahead and remove so we can drop down this lower panel. Okay, so we remove these 3 screws. They're the 2 that we showed you on this side, and then there's one all the way on the right hand side. This pops on down here, and then we can actually get this tug to give us a little bit more space. Now we can pull out the OBD2 port there out of the panel, so this panel comes free. Now it's going to give us the access to get up underneath. The access, the grommet for firewall access. Okay, so with this panel up out of the way, now we can start looking for the best place for us to run power access to the firewall. Now, there are factory grommets back behind the insulation mat here. If you have the automatic like we do, the space where generally the clutch passes through the firewall, we'll have a nice grommet there. I mean, majority of people nowadays will have the automatic version of this vehicle, so this will be the easiest for us to pass our wire through. But this is a nice rubber grommet that goes right into the firewall that we're going to use for our power wire. So we'll pop this out, make a little hole in it, and run that wire through. If you have the manual version and this space is occupied, again, you may have to search up, maybe up above the fuse panel here or back up behind the computer just to take a look to see the exact best place to run a wire through. You may have to drill and put a grommet in yourself. But for those that are automatic, use that grommet. It's going to save you a ton of time. All right, so we're here under the hood. We found this little hole here. We focus in on that. We ran it through. The firewall has a little kind of a sound deadening mat to it, but there's this little hole through it which we're going to run a wire, or this little metal wire that we're going to run our pull our cable through with. And up underneath That's where we ran it up. See that hole? Goes right up underneath. It's perfect. So what we're gonna do is we'll hook our wire to it once we run it, and that allows us to pull it up through. Now we can't forget to first run our wire through that rubber grommet, so as we pull the wire through, we can put the grommet back in and seal up and around the wire so we don't have any leaks. All right, so we need to start popping this panel off here. Now, we can do so as this panel is on top of this one, but ideally we get this one also out of the way. That requires us to remove this handle, and it's a little bit difficult, but we'll show you how to do that. But first, let's go ahead and get this guy out of the way. Now what we can do is just use our fingers and go ahead and start popping it loose. And again, just clips all down the back. You can use your fingers. Just be gentle, you don't want to break the clips. Okay, so we started working this clip loose back behind here. Well, really what you do is you get back up underneath and start working it out. Just like so. Once you've pulled that clip out, this panel actually should just come on out. And then right before we put this back on, we'll slip the clip on about halfway and then pop it back into place. Now this allows us access here. You can pop this cover off. It should expose the little screw. And then this panel should come right on out, slip out from underneath this, and have the space that we need to run our 4-gauge. Okay, we popped that cover off here. Just a little plastic cover held on with pressure, and it's a little flat head. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. Okay. So this now should give us a ton more space. Okay, so we went ahead and pulled our wire through there. Remember, we came out through that hole. We already split loomed it. We mounted our fuse holder just on these anchor mounts. Made a little ABS plastic mount with the anchor mount sandwiched in between, and put the anchor mount back on. It holds our fuse holder, which is super nice. And then from that point, we split loomed our lead. That'll go right to the positive post on the battery. We haven't done anything yet to the electrical, just running wire at this point. But once we are ready to add the ring terminal to the positive post, before we do so, we'll remove the negative off the battery just so we can safely do so. So besides hooking up the positive wire on the battery, we're just about done underneath the hood. From up underneath, we went ahead and put the grommet in. Got that all sealed up. Wire goes up underneath the carpet. We'll come out right there, back behind this panel. Once we get it all back in, and from this point, ran the wire just up underneath the carpet there since we popped our panels out. And it runs all the way back. We continued running. Now we did pop the back seat out. It's just held on with 2 pressure clips. You pop it up and then unhook it here. Now the customer wanted us to use his wire and it was just a hair short. So unfortunately I had to flip the amp upside down to ensure that our terminals met the wire and everything had enough length. So for those that are OCD, I'm sorry that the logo is upside down. That is there. We got our positive, our negative all done. We just need to now run our ground, and we also ran our speaker wire. That'll go out there for now. So at this point, we need to start prepping the ground as well as our RCAs and snagging signal. Okay, so for the ground, from our amplifier, we're gonna go ahead and bring it down here. This is nice and solid. This is a kind of the cross brace for the seats and seat belts and everything, so we know that's nice and sturdy. What we're gonna do is we're gonna actually put our ground right here since we had to flip our amplifier over. What we're gonna do is use a wire brush here, clean up the paint, and then what we're gonna do is do a nut and bolt and make sure it's all nice and snug. Okay, so there is our ground, super solid. Put a bolt in there, everything's cleaned up. This will sit nicely up back under the back side of the seat. We'll get everything zip tied and cleaned up here. So at this point, we're actually okay to go ahead and connect our power cable to our battery. And from this point now, we need to work on our signal. While these panels are off, I also pulled off the B pillars. And what we're gonna do, rather than pulling the radio out, is we're gonna tap into our speaker outputs right there on both sides. So we don't have to tear apart the dash. All right, so for signal here, since we have the B pillar covers off here, what we're gonna do is tap into the rear speakers. We're here on the passenger side, and what we're using is T-taps to tap into that. Now the wires that we're tapping into here, positive is your purple and your negative is your brown, and they are a twisted pair, and it looks like brown with a purple stripe. But they are a twisted pair. There's other twisted pairs in there. Those are generally for the airbag sensor, so do not tap into those. Tap specifically into these ones. Again, it's these two, purple and brown. Brown's generally your negative on these Volkswagens. We'll show you what it looks like on the driver's side. All right, we're here on the driver's side, and it's red and brown, both with a yellow stripe. So red is your positive, brown is your negative, both with the yellow stripe. Again, we just tapped into that. So what we've done to tap into those is we got about 15 foot of our 18 gauge OFC speaker wire, and we ran that down along, and then we're gonna zip tie that to the existing loom, but then we pulled back this carpet and ran it straight across, and we're gonna go to the other B pillar, and we're gonna put our line out converter in the B pillar on the passenger side. There's a perfect little place for it that we can mount everything up and keep it safe and out of the way. All right, so here's our line out converter. We have a ton of length here that we need to clean up, zip tie, and put away. But for now, we're gonna show you exactly how to hook one of these up in this Volkswagen. So with our line out converter, we have our line that comes in from the driver's side, as we showed you where that was hooked up. And then here's our passenger side. So we have our two channels of input for our line out converter. Those go into our line out converter here, left and right. So your left speaker input is your whites, and the negative wire is the one with the black line, and then your right input is your grays. Now this line out converter also requires power and ground. We ran 18 gauge all the way back and connected at the amplifier with a spade terminal. We'll show you what that looks like before we clean that up. But that's where we're robbing power and ground. And then we have a ton of RCA cable left over that we need to bundle and hide in the B pillar as well. And then finally, our remote turn-on wire is this blue-white wire, and that's where we connected our remote turn-on wire that goes to the remote input on our amplifier. So there's all our connections here. Now we'll show you what this looks like once we get all the wire cleaned up, but those are what we need to do to connect for signal without having to even touch the radio up in the dash and pull that on out and risk breaking pieces. So a lot easier to tap into the B pillar here. Okay, so up underneath the hood, got our fuse all done. Now what we ended up doing is actually just cutting the bolt out. The little indentation on the bolt prevents the nut from coming all the way off. And you could jimmy rig it and cut up your ring terminal to try to get it to fit up and around the bolt. That's your call. We ended up replacing the stud there with a new stud and a nut. We put a lock washer and regular washer on there. It is nice and secure, and it's long enough down the road if in case you had any other accessories, you have the place for it. Now remember, we put the positive on the terminal only after you've removed the negative off the battery, just so you don't create a short or do any damage to the factory wiring of the vehicle. So at this point, we can pop this on down. We are done underneath the hood, and we can close it at this time. All right, so you can kind of see that we have a yellow wire and a black wire that's underneath the terminals of our power and ground for our amplifier. We use little spade terminals that fit in there, and we're just robbing that power and ground for our line out converter. The line out converter requires that 12 volt signal in order to generate a remote turn on. So that went down there, and then there's our remote turn on wire. We need to still zip tie and clean up the wiring here, but that's our connection there over here. So our remote turn on wire goes up and it sits in this little pocket. It's perfect there, it's nice and snug, and everything's zip tied to the existing loom, and it'll fit back behind the panel. So really at this point, it's time to start reassembling the car. Okay, so we got the back seat all back in, or the panels all back in, everything clips back into place. Just take your time, it all folds away, and the panels all back in, got the handle all back in. Here we are in the trunk. Got our P3, 12-inch. Got everything hooked up there. So got this all taken care of as well. Seat folds down. There's our amplifier. Got Got our RCAs also mounted so they don't get pulled out. Got our wiring all done, all bundled nicely. Everything hooks up clean to the amp. Got this kick all put back together. Line out converter is tucked up nicely inside there. Key panel is all done, and we did this all without even touching the radio. Well, that's about it for this install. If you have any questions on what we did here, go ahead and post a comment below. Our goal here today was just to be as non-invasive to the factory radio as possible, which we've achieved. We didn't even have to pull it out. Again, there's other techniques of getting your amplifier installed, but this is the one that we chose here today. Thanks again for watching. Hit the like button if you like what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe. We post great content on the channel all the time. We will see you in the next video.